question we want to answer today. And in moving forward, as the presentation itself in advertisements would have played out, that we want to look at action planning. Now, action planning is not new to any of us. We do action plans all the time. We have our SIP, we ask for action plans to by grade level and so on. And so the concept of action planning remains the same, but what it is that we want to focus on today is looking at the elements of the action plan process and looking to see how we can fit this process into this new era of engagement. And so action plans would normally include those improvement goals and targets that you have set out for your school. And these targets are normally set based on some policy directive as well as internal decisions based on assessment of the school's context. In addition to having the targets outlined, one of the other areas that follows the targets would also be the specific actions or methods that will be applied to really achieve those goals or targets set out. Also, with the activities that we outline in our action plans, we also have roles and responsibilities assigned to specific members of staff. And the final element would be that of the ensuring that we have timelines for all of our targets, because each target in itself would be treated with its own timeline. And so timelines and deadlines are all elements. And I know that what I have in front of me here, what I have shown to you today, is nothing new. But again, we want to see how we can take these structures and apply it to what we're currently undergoing. So we have two major objectives as we focus on the putting together of our action plans to treat with the current situation. And these two objectives are asked in the form of a question. One, how can we provide guidance to our teachers in developing an appropriate and targeted action plan? And two, what are some suggested mechanisms or tools that can be used in monitoring the successful implementation of the activities and progress from these action plans? So again, we first acknowledge that there is a shift in how we engage our children. There's a shift in how school operates. And as of such, we want to take the action plan process and we want to see how we can infuse this into this new era. And as we infuse this into the new era, we want to ask ourselves the two questions. How do we provide guidance in the development of the action plan? And then what are our mechanisms that we put in place to monitor the successful implementation of the activities coming from the action plan? Now that the stage has been set, let us look at the action plan process. So the process starts with the conducting of a needs assessment. And once we have conducted our needs assessment to determine the areas of focus, then we move to developing the action plan. Once we have developed our action plan, then we start to implement the activities coming from the action plan. Throughout the process of implementation, we want to ensure that there is continued monitoring of the activities, and then we move to evaluate the activities. And in looking at the evaluation, we then continue the cycle by reassessing, and the process goes on and on. We now want to take each element and really delve in one at a time. And let us remember that the era that we're in is different. And because of this new era, we are trying to now create the new structures. And we understand that it's not an overnight process. It's not something that you can get it right in one go. And as of such, we need to pay attention to the elements of the process as we work to apply, assess, and then adjust. So let's begin with looking at the needs assessment. Normally, in looking at our needs assessment, we would explore the context of the school. We'll also explore the NEI reports and any other data set that can provide evidence to support the ideas and activities and also the targets that need to be defined for your action plan. And so we go by the statement, assessment informs action. Now, based on the fact that we're undergoing now a pandemic and the school structures would have been shifted, there are some critical areas that we need to add to the pool of factors to consider when conducting our needs assessment. Here are a few. We want to look at students' access to the modalities. It is very important at this point in time that each school gets an understanding of the access level of their students. It is important to know if students will be able to access the LMS. You want to know if students will be able to continually access, or do you have students who can access only partially? So this is an important factor to consider when conducting a needs assessment. You need to know the students' access to the modalities, because this will inform how it is that you treat with the students within their respective modality. Another area that cannot be ignored would be teacher competence. It's very important that at this point in time, because of the new structures and the fact that we are shifting how we normally do things, we need to know if the teachers are also equipped to engage students in whatever modality that the school decides to operate under. Another area of concern would be your resources. You need to assess to determine the resources that you have and also the resources that you need. And so in doing so, you will know how to structure your activities in treating with the gaps and concerns that you want to address. A critical area of concern is also the learning gap. In your needs assessment, you need to understand the gap that in thinking about what took place in March and the fact that the rush was in to try to engage students as best as possible, we can understand that between March and now, there would have been significant learning gaps. And so it is important to understand the depth of knowledge that the students have and to understand what are the prerequisite knowledge that they have for the content area that they need to capture as they move on to the next grade. And so these are just some examples of critical areas that you want to assess as you work towards putting together your action plan. Now, once you have identified your critical areas based on your needs assessment, it is time to now discuss the findings and to also see what areas you pick up on within your needs assessment that can be pulled in now to your action plan. And so we move over to the development stage of the action plan process. During the development phase, once you have discussed your findings, you want to now discuss and outline your targets. Once you have outlined your targets, you want to now establish your activities and define the roles and responsibilities of all those who are concerned. Once it is that you have defined the roles and responsibilities and you know all your key activities, you want to know time-bound these activities. And so you create a timeline for achievement of your targets. It's very important that at this point in time, we really begin to assess and to develop our action plans. The approaches that normally hold with the face-to-face engagement, those approaches would have been tried and tested approaches over the years. And so because everything is new to us now, we have to be critical in ensuring that we understand and try to learn all that we need to engage our students effectively. And so let's explore a case. In this case, it says that the results of a needs assessment conducted by the senior management of MOE Primary School revealed the following. From the needs assessment, it revealed that 45% of the teaching staff are not familiar with the LMS. It also revealed that 60% of students have direct access to the LMS. And this is also saying to us then that we have 40% of the students who cannot access the LMS directly. And the final finding would be that the diagnostic results reveal major learning gaps. So these are critical areas that we have picked up on based on the case here from the needs assessment conducted. And so there is now the need to develop one's action plan. But here's another question for you to consider. How do we foster accountability during the development phase of the action plan? We want to ensure that we don't just leave it up to an individual to go and put together an action plan and then it is implemented just like that. We want to ensure that as it is being developed, we have systems of accountability within the process as well. And so, as we aim to treat with the case that is being explored right now, we want to look at 3 essential factors to bear in mind when planning for accountability. 1, we have to look at the involvement. We need to look at who are the individuals who need to take part in this activity. 2, the ownership. And 3, clear definition of roles and responsibilities. We want to explore each. So it says here underneath involvement, when individuals are involved in developing an action plan, the pool of solutions and perspective increases, which results in a more comprehensive plan of action. It is very important that we ensure that we involve all the key stakeholders in the process of planning. It is not wise for us to take upon ourselves the task to individually decide to write an action plan that governs a large system of operation without consulting or getting the feedback from the stakeholders involved. Once it is that we decide to work in isolation, it diminishes the effectiveness of the action plan created. And so it is important to involve the key stakeholders in the planning process as individuals who are on the ground and persons with the experience of what is taking place within their context would be better able to provide solutions that are in line with the context of the institution. And so in going back to the case at hand that said that 45% as a finding, 45% of the teaching staff are not familiar with LMS. Being that that's a key finding from the needs assessment and you want to now develop your key activity or to your targets for your action plan, in looking at involvement, you'd want to involve as many key stakeholders as possible. And so in looking at treating with the gaps with the use of the LMS, you might want to involve yourself as the principal, the vice principal. You might have a designate, someone who is external to the institution, someone who is knowledgeable of the system. You might want to also involve your senior teachers in sitting down and putting together the systems that are necessary to ensure that the teaching staff are now able to engage the student effectively utilizing the LMS. In looking at the fact that 60% of the students had direct access to the LMS, in looking at your treatment of the situation by means of accounting for the 60% who can access the LMS, as well as the 40% who are unable to access, you'd want to pull in a team concerned. So the principal could be involved in the process. Your designate could be your guidance counselor if you have one, your senior teachers, and your teachers. They should be a part of the planning process as you look towards engaging all your students, irrespective of the modality or their access. Then, in looking at the diagnostic results, which revealed major learning gaps, again, you want to pull in the team that can treat with the situation and provide solutions in line with the concern. And so, the principal might want to be a part of this process. You might want to pull on your senior teacher. If it is subject related, for example, mathematics, you might want to pull on your school-based math teacher. And you should have a CIT as well. And so you want to also pull on the efforts of the curriculum implementation team in modifying and designing the curriculum to treat with the known learning gaps. And so all of this here is just treating with the nature of involvement. And so if you realize, even though it might be one action plan, different groups of individuals play a role in addressing different aspects of the action plan. Again, we want to discourage the use of one individual sitting down and trying to design an entire action plan, but more so you are utilizing your staff and the more knowledgeable others who you can pull on with their experience so that they can provide effectively to the action plan process. Now, the other area that we discuss as being critical for accountability would be ownership. It says here, process owners are to be identified and their autonomy to operate should be made known to them. It is very important, especially during this era, that you try not to take everything onto yourself. We want to discourage the idea of micromanaging all activities. Once it is that you have a staff and you decide to break up your activities and to try to put together your action plan, you want to give various aspects of the action plan process to different individuals. And so they're the ones who are held accountable for the putting together of that aspect or the assigned aspect of the action plan. So as an example, going back to the case that we're exploring earlier, which said that as a finding, 45% of the teaching staff are not familiar with the LMS. It could be that you have an external person who is playing a role in training the teachers, and you put the process in the hands of the vice principal. Or there could be a techno-savvy individual on your staff who you want to assign the role in overseeing this process. So even if a part of your plan you have external individuals to conduct training, you want the process to be in the hands of someone who can take it on from the inside as well. And so you could assign a senior teacher, a teacher who has the knowledge of the use of the software, or it could be assigned to even your vice principal. In looking at the accountability of the students and trying to put systems in place, as you pull together a large team to put the ideas to treat the situation, you still want to assign someone to lead the process. And so you could assign your vice principal, or you could assign a teacher, or senior teacher, or so on. But you want to ensure again that somebody takes ownership of various parts of the action plan process in terms of putting together or developing the action plan itself. And again, looking at the diagnostic results, even though you pull the teachers into the process, you might want to pull the CIT leader to take and give governance to the activities as well as the objectives that should be put in place for treating with the major gaps from the needs assessment in terms of students learning. And if it is subject-based, you could also assign it to teachers based on their strengths. And again, if you have a school-based math teacher or a math coordinator or just a senior teacher who you have assigned the responsibility for mathematics, that person can take control and give governance to how the curriculum is treated with for mathematics in your school. And the same can be said about the other subject areas as well. The final area that we explored as being essential in accountability would be having clear definitions of your roles and responsibilities. It reads here that it is important for the roles and responsibilities of each member or team to be clearly established. It is very important, especially in this time, to ensure that we don't take anything for granted, we don't make assumptions. We want to ensure that as the team plans, you define the roles of each group or individual so that once it is that the task comes up and it speaks to a particular area, we know exactly who needs to take it on. Let us go back to the case. So again, in looking at the fact that you assign someone as a process owner, and you have a larger pool of individuals who are involved in the process itself, the clearly defined goals must be established. That is how you can account when persons or individuals have their clearly defined roles. And so when we speak to the findings of 45% of the teaching staff being not familiar with the LMS, then we want to ensure that in trying to treat the situation, we're talking about the training of the teachers in the use of the LMS, and then not just the training, but also monitoring of teachers' progress in the use of the LMS, because training is an ongoing process, and in monitoring, you want to see how the progress is going, and that can inform how you modify your treatment towards growth. In looking at the students' accountability, 60% of the students have direct access to the LMS. And so you want to be clear in stating that you're accounting for students' access to the various modalities. And so you want to have a mechanism in place that treats with knowing whether or not students are accessing the LMS. And in the case of this school here, the 40% of the students who cannot access the LMS, there are other modalities of engagement. And so you want to also have a mechanism in place to capture their access and use of the resources outside of the LMS as well. For example, how can you look at the broadcasting programs on television? It will be important to know how many students can access, and then to see what can be put in place to see whether or not the students are accessing these programs, and to see if they're also learning and benefiting from the programs as well. The final area that speaks to the major learning gaps, as a defined role, you want to look at having structured interventions to closing those gaps. And then you want to also monitor the effectiveness of the intervention applied. And so these three critical areas are help to account for the work that is put in to creating or developing the action plan itself. You want to pull and involve as many persons as possible so as to pull on their expertise, their experience and knowledge. But you also want to ensure that for each component of the action plan process within the development phase, you want to ensure that there's someone who is considered to be the process owner. And then you want to make sure that for these teams or individuals working on various aspects of the action plan, there is the clearly defined roles and responsibilities. And so you get more of a holistic approach to treating with the situation based on the assessment of the school's context. Now, as we progress, we now have developed our action plan. But in developing our action plan, we now want to look at the implementation of the activities. Accountability is still key, and so we should not separate monitoring from implementation. As you implement the activities of your action plan, you want to ensure that you have systems in place to monitor the progress, because we must remember that before COVID, we had systems that would have undergone trial and error. And so, because the systems are now new with the virtual space, we want to monitor how we progress and document and see how we can modify thereafter so that we can improve on our systems of operation in the virtual space. And so the question is asked, what does monitoring look like? In the context of teaching and learning, monitoring would normally take place by means of observing lessons on a regular basis. We also look at the vetting of lesson plans, we look at quality assuring student interventions, and we look at management of the curriculum. And all of these activities, we would normally do them with the face-to-face means. So you would walk into a classroom, or you would schedule a classroom observation as the principal, and you'll go in and you'll observe the work of the teacher as he or she delivers to the students. And from there, you're able to provide feedback towards the teacher's growth and development in engaging students. And also, we have our senior teachers who would mark lesson plans. And I must say it's important that in the marking of the lesson plans, you're not just signing to say that the lesson plans are seen or they were submitted, but you're also looking at the quality of the plans to ensure that the objectives are aligned to the teaching and learning activities. And you also want to ensure that the objectives and the activities are aligned to the assessment. And so that is what we normally do when it comes on to the face-to-face engagement. But we must be reminded that the classrooms are empty, the physical space is empty, and we still need to monitor. We still need to monitor the activities as we implement our methods to treat with students' learning. And so we are called to remember the following. We must be reminded of the following, where there is a shift, and we are called to be adaptable. And in being adaptable, we want to understand that we have to step outside of our comfort zone until we create what is considered to be the new comfort zone. But until then, we must bear with the process. And so we acknowledge that there are students who will access the LMS because they have stable internet access and they have a device. But you have to ask yourself, how do we continue to monitor now that there is a shift? We have to now look at being able to access the LMS, to go inside the classrooms. So it's important that as a school utilizing the LMS, you would ensure that as the principal or even as senior teachers, you're able to go inside the classes to observe the activities and the interaction so you can continue to monitor and give support. We also know that there are still students who cannot access all the modalities. And so there are those students who have to look at the radio programs and look at the television. So everyone's context is different. And in looking at the fact that the context is different, you have to be able to still monitor. So how do you ensure that students, how do you monitor and ensure that students are learning from the radio programs and the television for those who can access it? What can you put in place to capture that information? And then we have those students who will have to rely on learning kits. We still need to ensure that there's a system in place to monitor their progress and growth as they utilize the kits. And so the question is asked, what do we do as a school to ensure that we account for our students? That's a question that should be in the back of our minds, and we must seek to answer the question as we engage with our teachers and work towards treating with the teaching and learning process for our students. So we look at a second case, and Mr. Brown here is a teacher at MOE Primary School. The school decided that teachers are to use Google Classroom to engage all students. Mr. Brown, without any consultation, decided to share a Zoom link with his students. Of the 25 students in his class, only 5 can access the class via the link. Mr. Brown goes to the Google Classroom only to post assessment items based on what he taught during his Zoom sessions. Now, before we go any further, it's very important to note that what Mr. Brown is doing goes against the policy directive of the school itself. The school is saying, let us use Google Classroom. Mr. Brown, a teacher at the school, decides that he can't be bothered with the teaching process, or he might not be able to conduct the sessions using Zoom, and so he resorts, not Zoom, using the LMS, and so he resorts to providing a Zoom link because he has a Zoom account, and he only engages his 5 students. And once he's through, he goes to the Google Classroom and he uploads assessment activities. Now, all 25 students can see the assessments, but would they be prepared to access and to actually answer those questions and take part in the activities? The answer would be no, because the students would not have been engaged as how the 5 would have been who could have access. So what happens here is you want to be able to provide guidance to Mr. Brown, but here's a question. What monitoring mechanisms would bring to light what Mr. Brown has been doing regarding the teaching of his students? What we see here is we have to ensure that as we implement, so bear in mind, the action plan would have been prepared. And so Mr. Brown should be implementing the activities based on the action plan. But Mr. Brown is deviating from the intended approach. And so the monitoring mechanisms would allow you now as the principal to go in and to see if all systems are going as planned. And so in answering this question, you would want to still conduct your observation. But the first point of contact would have been the lesson plan itself. In exploring the lesson plan, you could look to see whether or not Mr. Brown would have been organizing his activities in keeping with the use of the LMS. And so if it is established in the lesson plan that is using the Zoom link, right there and then, you can consult with Mr. Brown and move towards a solution. But let us say that Mr. Brown did not capture his use of the Zoom platform in his lesson plan. So by means of regular visits to the LMS or to the classroom itself, you'll realize that the nature of work placed in the classroom does not lend itself to teaching and learning, but only assessment. That would have been another point for which you are able to pick up on what it is that Mr. Brown is doing And so you can consult with Mr. Brown. Going a bit further, there's also looking at student feedback and looking at the resources and also his log. And in looking at the logs, you will be able to pick up, as well as also from his evaluation, lesson evaluations, you can pick up on what are the things that are going right and what are the deviations to the intended plan. And so with these monitoring mechanisms, you're able to quality assure the implementation of the plans coming from your action plan. So here are some important questions you want to ask yourself when you're monitoring the implementation of the plans from the action plan itself. You want to ask the question of who. Who will monitor to check that the actions have been taken as specified in the plan? The principal can play a role, the vice principal can play a role, and your senior teachers can also play a role in checking and monitoring to ensure that we are going as planned. You want to ask the question of when. When will the monitoring take place? You can have periodical visits to the classes, you can have consultations, but you have to work out the when part of the process. Then you ask the question of what. What strategies will be used to monitor progress? As we looked at earlier, going to visit the classroom as a method, and also consulting, looking at the lesson plans, and so on. These are all means of trying to ensure that what is established as the action from your action plan is being carried out as intended. And you want to ask the question of how. How will the outcomes be reported? This is a critical part of the process in that as we conduct our observation and as we go to consult and to quality assure, we want to be able to report or to even log and document the findings from the work we have done in monitoring. And we'll discuss how this becomes critical and important later on as we move towards the end of the presentation. Now, as a synopsis, in looking at the who, you might want to pull on your senior teachers. In looking at the management of the curriculum, you might want to pull on your CIT leader. And again, I did express that you can schedule when you look at monitoring various aspects, and based on the nature of the target, some require more time than others. So some can be weekly, monthly, termly, quarterly, but you decide. Now, in monitoring, there needs to be the documentation as a part of the strategy towards monitoring. And so you would want to have your established lesson observation forms and progress reports. And you want to encourage for teachers to all be logging at this point in time and evaluating their lessons. But I need to discuss quickly the lesson plan observation form. If the form that you previously had, for those who had forms, would speak to engagement in a face-to-face environment. But now, what we see here is how we engage students have shifted, and so we might need to also revisit our forms and make changes so that it is now suitable for the observation in the virtual space. So that's an area for consideration on your part. And we want to ensure that as we monitor, you want to create a chain of communication. And so if you are monitoring through your senior teachers, you want to be able to get feedback towards growth, of course. And so you establish means of documenting. And because we're no longer in the physical space, we normally have face-to-face meetings, but now we need to utilize other means of communicating. And I know what comes to mind quickly would be that of the Zoom sessions or the Teams or the Meets. But you want to utilize also alternative means by means of documentation. And I consider it to be quite convenient that as we utilize the Google Suite, there are also those wonderful files and forms and sheets that can be utilized in the process. And so I'm going to quickly walk you through just some of the forms, not as a means of teaching you how to use it, but just to show you that they exist, and you can now explore and see how you can incorporate these forms within the Google Suite to capture information, to communicate and evaluate, as well as to monitor. And so You could always create a Google Doc, and in creating your Google Doc, you want to share it with the respective teachers or your senior teachers so that they can provide feedback. And so as they complete the form, you're able to see the form in real time as well, and you can see as they type and as they share. You can also restrict who can access. And so if you want persons to view but not edit, that is also something to consider. But you want to utilize these alternative means of documentation. So as you document progress, you want to utilize these tools. Additionally, let us say you don't want to use the docs, you can also use Sheets. Google Sheets is another area you can pull on. And again, you can share for persons to edit. You can block out cells, you can hide sheets, you can restrict access, you can decide who can view versus who can edit, but it's also a means of providing feedback. And you can always add sheets as well as rename the sheets. And then there's also Google Forms. You can create your forms for teachers to fill out and complete. And once they complete the forms, you can now go to their responses and you can explore to see what the data is like and what the feedback is like. And this is a means of documentation for you. It's also important to know that when you want somebody to fill out your form, you don't share the form with them, you must send them the form. So if you share the form with them, they'll be able to edit the questions that you have asked. But if you want the person to only fill out the form, you would send the form and not share the form. And again, I say to you, the aim is not to teach you how to use it, but to just bring to light the fact that it exists and you can utilize this as a resource. And so if it is also that you don't want to view the data here, you can always go to the sheet option and transfer the information from this form to a Google Sheet that you can download and edit and pull together as a report as you see fit. And then we have the good old virtual means of having your meetings. And so you utilize whatever platform you have so that you can have progress meetings, you can discuss. And I must recommend to you that at this point in time, it is very important to meet frequently, to discuss and to assess, because as you try to figure out how to engage students and to find out what works best for your school, you need to be able to consult. So encourage teachers to consult in small groups, as well as they can consult together and you can get the feedback from the findings of their discussion. And we can even consider having meetings where someone is unable to attend, but they need to provide feedback, and the individual can always do a recording, and that recording can be played in the meeting. So let us utilize the tools as best as possible. And here's a nice quote that we can look at. It says, make a game plan and stick to it unless it's not working. And as we are here today, we know that everything is new to us, and we're trying to understand what is taking place around us. We want to assess, and as we assess, we want to use that assessment to coin the development of our action plans. We want to implement, and we want to also monitor. But what happens if in monitoring, we realize that things are not working? This is captured by what we call evaluation. And it says here, program evaluations are critical for informing the structural changes that need to be made. Now, when teachers on a whole hear the word evaluation, they hear appraisal. And these two words are used so often that they become one of the same things. But we want to move away from the thinking that when we say evaluation, we want to appraise just the teacher. We want to evaluate by appraising the operation itself, because we want to know whether or not what we have as a system is actually working. And if it's not working, we want to be able to make adjustments so that we can improve, and we continue to evaluate and continue to make improvements until we get to a place where the system is ideal. And so we explore a final case. It says here, the principal of MOE Primary School at the end of the first term decided to evaluate all systems of operation, and this includes teaching and learning. It says that the two of the critical feedback points for mathematics teachers and mathematics teaching and learning were: one, the students were not able to answer most of the assessment items from the school-designed learning kits. It also says here that it was noted that the feedback students gave on learning kits returned were not factored into the learning kits that followed. So what is taking place here is the principal would have conducted now an evaluation of the systems. And in looking at the teaching and learning involving mathematics, it was noted that one, students are not able to answer the questions from learning kits that the schools create. And two, when students provide feedback on one learning kit, that feedback is not factored into the next learning kit. And these would have been problems that would have been highlighted from the evaluation. But having done the evaluation, the cycle can now continue. We can now reassess, adjust, re-implement, and continue to monitor. But here is a critical question to ask. What mechanism would have been used to capture this data? This question is critical in that as you were monitoring throughout the entire phase of implementation, you would have also been documenting. So earlier when I talked about utilizing Google Docs, Google Sheets, Google Forms, having teachers log, creating your observation forms, you want to ensure that all of this data is captured. You want to ensure that you're logging and you're capturing the evidence, because when it's time to evaluate, you have the evidence to carry out your evaluation. And in carrying out your evaluation, you're able now to see what are the areas that we need to work on so that we can improve our structures. And after you identify these areas, you can now go and adjust your approach and you re-implement and you monitor once more. And so that is why we consider it to be a cycle. And we would have highlighted here, again, that you want to utilize your lesson observation forms, your evaluation logs, and to also look at the students' work. But again, if this is not documented, then we would not be able to capture this. And so as we now move towards closing, we must be reminded of the following. All that we're undergoing now is truly a shift, and the shift requires us to be adaptable. As we work to treat with the adaptive challenges, we know that we require a rapid learning and innovation. We need to change our approaches. We need to be open to trying new things. And we also need to understand that we're going to be stepping out of our comfort zone in doing so. But the critical areas that we discussed today would have been accountability, ensuring that all the systems that you put in place are in place. And in keeping means of accountability, we have to monitor. We monitor throughout the entire process. And after we monitor, we want to evaluate. I did share also that in the evaluation process, you want to ensure that you separate the thinking that evaluation is only appraisal. Evaluation is you evaluating your systems so that you can now start to make improvements. Right? So I hope that what was done today would have been captivating and you can take from the elements of this presentation. As principals, I want to encourage you to ensure that you have your senior teacher, your math-based, your school-based math teacher, or any teacher you have who plays a critical role in just lesson planning, teaching and learning, who play a senior role. I want to encourage you to ensure that they attend the next session. Our next session for these individuals will be on October 21 at 3 p.m. And this would have been sent in the same bulletin shared with you for this session as well. We want to engage them as well. We want to assist them so that they too can improve on their craft as we try to understand the space that we're in. Let me also share with you, colleagues, contact email addresses and numbers for the respective regional mathematics coordinators. Once you take this down and you have any concerns or issues regarding mathematics, you can contact them via email or via the numbers assigned, and they will indeed be ready to support you. So please feel free to contact them. I thank you for being here today. I know it is now it's minutes to 4, and you would have taken the time to be here with us. We do, however, crave your feedback. And so if you have a QR code scanner, you can scan it and complete our evaluation form, or you can go by the link. The link is being posted by Mrs. Kamei Johnson Borrell in the chat, so you can click on the link and evaluate. Once more, I thank you, colleagues. At this point in time, I don't know if there are any questions, but if you do have your questions, you can always ask at this time as we prepare now to close. And I'm seeing here that we want to share the contacts. So let me share the contacts again. So you can capture the contacts of the respective coordinators per region. All right, colleagues, once more, I thank you. I really hope that you learned a lot from today's session. And let me just quickly go over the critical points. You want to ensure that you embody the action plan phase. You want to conduct your needs assessment. You want to develop your action plan, but you don't develop it alone. You want to develop the action plan with the support of your staff, and in ensuring that they support you, you must have your process owners, and the roles and responsibilities must be clearly defined. As you implement your activities, you must monitor, and as you monitor, you must have your implementation means of monitoring. Once you have monitored, there comes a time you need to evaluate your systems, but in evaluating, you'd have had your clear documentation to do so. Once you have your documentations, you can pull back on that data set and recoin your approach as you move forward. Thank you once more, and let me just ensure that I have for you the QR code and link up again. All the best, and I look forward to engaging your teachers in the sessions to come. Have a great evening, principals. All right, I am returning once more. I'm seeing a question regarding an example of how to monitor when you have pre-prepared worksheets. Not a problem. So what is important when it comes on to the pre-prepared worksheets for your students? What you want to do is ensure that first, you need to know if students would have accessed the worksheets. So you want a system in place that captures who is accessing the worksheets. Once you have captured who is accessing the worksheets, then you want to have a system that you are able to collect and to look and review the responses of the students. So it becomes very important that as you look through the students' work, you're looking to see on the part of the students they're learning, as well as you want to critically analyze the quality of the sheets in ensuring that the students are able to understand it. So you must question if the statements or the content is designed in a way that would be easier for the students to engage with the concepts. So you're always looking at the work that you have created, as well as the feedback that the students are giving. And that is what you want to do when you are monitoring the kits or the worksheets that you send out for the students. You want to know who are the ones who are accessing the sheets. You want to look at the feedback, and you want to always question the quality of the sheet to see how can it be made better so that the students can manipulate what is on those sheets. All right, I hope that answers the question, and it doesn't just become a principal role, but again, you must have your process owners. So you could have senior teachers who are in place to look at the quality of the sheets that are prepared before they go out. All right, and again, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Mr. Edgell. Thank you so much for your presentation today. There is a question. Welcome to our viewers on YouTube. There is a question from a participant on YouTube. Will there be a session in relation to early childhood? Mr. Edgell? Right, so Mr. Ejil is trying to speak. Ms. Rankin, could you help out a bit, please? Could you help us by unmuting Mr. Ejil? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rankins. All right, so on our part, we will not be having sessions here, but what we know is there are a series of sessions going on. So just to go back to the bulletins that have been shared with schools to see what is there. But what it is that there is also a specific request. You can actually make that request through the various groups like JTC, and we'll see how, and they can see how best they can support and provide guidance in that regard. But I know that there has been some amount of consultation. I don't have it in the back of my mind right now, but just go back to the bulletins that have been shared so far, and as well, you can be free to make the requests for what it is that you want as well. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Ejil. Any more questions? Any more questions, principals? You have been such a wonderful audience this afternoon. Any more questions? Mr. Ejil, will this presentation be available to us?
Yes, the presentation will be on YouTube. Let's go to NCEL Jamaica's page.
Thank you. All right, be it there are no more questions. All things, we know that all things don't come to an end, but sadly, we have to say today's session has come to an end. Thank you all for joining us today, and we do hope the session was beneficial to you and it will help you in your professional growth. The title of the presentation, you will find it as well on YouTube if you want to watch a replay of the session for today. But the title, we're looking at mathematics leadership, taking a leap in the virtual world. And our aim for today is to support primary school principals in providing oversight and guidance in the development and implementation of mathematics action plans in their respective schools. So what I will do now is I will copy the aim for today's session, and I have posted it in the chat for those who wish to ask or those who had asked before. I'm also posting the link for the YouTube. So when you are free, you're able to view the session that would have been done today. You can even share it with your colleagues who are unable to attend. Thanks to everyone for being here today. Special thanks to our YouTube videos, or YouTube viewers. And again, we have to leave now. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone. Take care.